What a show we have for you today as we try to answer what the heck is going on with Barcelona ahead of this Liga F season, and to help us make sense as to why there are just 17 at the moment active players on the roster. We are joined by The Athletic's Ballus and Melanie Anzidei. They're going to break down the financial turmoil that got Barcelona to this point and preview the six-time reigning champions season odds. And we're going to kick off today's show with The Athletic's Barcelona writer, Ballus. Hello, Paul. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
Joining us from Barcelona, and we have to dive right into it. To get a better understanding of what is going on with this club, you have to look at Barca as a whole. How would you describe the club's financial situation at the moment?
It's a complicated thing. Barcelona have been through a financial turmoil, I'd say, for the last 5 years, since the end of COVID, really. And the club are navigating through that while they're trying to build a new stadium, assemble good squads to compete for trophies. So it's a bit of a challenge, and it's been translated in the most easy thing to see from us in the difficulties that they've had to sign players for the men's first team and to register them over the past 5 windows. In 5 consecutive years, we've seen that Barcelona have struggled to register the new signings up until the season was started. And that's something that is still ongoing and that right now is having an impact not just in the men's first team, but in the women's team and in all the sporting departments that the club has right now.
We see the trickle-down effects from what goes on in the men's side at clubs across the world that also have ownership in the women's game. But before we dive into how bad the financial situation has gotten on the men's side, can you take us back to around the time of COVID and really set the scene of what happened at Barcelona?
Yeah, so basically when COVID hit, before COVID hit, Barcelona was already nearing a critical state because the club was spending too much money basically on salaries. The salaries and the wage bill of the men's first team was just too big, and it just needed just a little push, which was COVID, which was a huge loss of income and a lot of money that the club stopped cashing in basically. And that was the perfect storm for Barcelona. They didn't have the money how to cover for this wage bill that they had, and that's basically possibly when it all started. It's partly the explanation of why Lionel Messi left the club. It's a very complex situation, that one about Lionel Messi, but long story short, this financial situation had a big impact on the reason why Messi had to leave the club. We've seen how Barcelona have worked hard to reassemble this sort of wage distribution within the squad, letting out old players that were having big salaries and trying to bring in players from the academy which are younger, brighter, possibly not as proven as the old ones, but with a big potential.
Lionel Messi has since moved on to PSG, now at Inter Miami. You mentioned the academy. I think that, their claim to fame, if they could produce 10 of them, would be Lamine Yamal. So that's a huge positive. But let's talk about the negative. How bad has it gotten on the men's side now, midway through 2025?
It's been bad, as in that the situation, as I told you, in the last 5 years, Barcelona are really struggling, just not to sign players because they are allowed to sign players, but to register them and to use them. And players are really at risk to join the club, but not being able to play for them. That's a big problem that Barcelona are facing right now. And that's because of a special norm inside the Spanish football, inside the Spanish league, inside La Liga. Because the Spanish competition has its own financial rule book, which is called La Liga salary limit, which in a way establish what the Spanish clubs can spend on wages for the athletes. That's what is limiting Barcelona, because to make those calculations, we're going to get deeper into that if you want later on. They take into account the losses from past budgeters and everything that has happened financially in the club over the past few years.
So La Liga does have a spending cap, as you've alluded to. Can you tell us more about that and how that's determined?
Yeah, so just to try to put it simple, it's a simple operation which you have to take all the income that you have budgeted for your club, and you have to take away from that three things. One is the non-sporting expenses, which are, electricity, the rents, anything that is related to non-sporting things. 2 is the short-term and long-term debt with banks, financial entities. And 3 is the losses that you had from previous budgeters, which, when I mentioned COVID, Barcelona had big losses in those years. And when you make that operation, you get a number, which is the number that every club is allowed to spend in athletes, in professional athletes, which is what La Liga allows, basically. What happens is that actually that number, when you do that operation, is sometimes smaller than the actual wage bill of the club. So that makes that a lot of clubs, such as Barcelona, are spending more money than the one that they are allowed to.
Understood. Moving on, can you explain the Marcus Rashford and Joan Garcia registrations? What role does that play in this entire process?
So basically, Joan Garcia and Marcus Rashford are out of the 5 players that Barcelona had to register in this summer, and they are the only ones that are registered so far. Joan Garcia could only be registered thanks to the injury of another of his teammates, which was Ter Stegen. La Liga allows to use part of the salary of a long-term injury, such as Marc-André Ter Stegen one, to register a new signing, and Joan Garcia took advantage of that. And then Marcus Rashford could be registered thanks to a bank guarantee that the club executive took, putting at risk their own wealth, just to register him in. The other 3 players are still not registered, and I'm talking here about Wojtek Szczesny, Gerard Martin, and Rooney Bargi, 3 players that are still waiting to be eligible to play for the club.
Marcus Rashford, of course, kind of on loan with an option to buy from Manchester United. What makes Barcelona as an entity, Paul, so interesting is they're the only Spanish team to operate basketball, women's soccer, futsal, handball, and hockey teams. How does this all factor in to the current climate at Barcelona?
This actually has like a really big impact because I was mentioning the salary limit and the money that the club are allowed to spend in athletes. It doesn't only impact the football athletes. It impacts like all sporting disciplines within the club. So basically, if you spend a lot in basketball, handball, futsal, that has an impact on the money that you can spend on the men's first team football. And that's why Barcelona, that's something that the club has been complaining for years, that in a way it limits or it sends a message that you shouldn't be spending in other sports. For the soul of the club and for the fan base, it's really important to have all these disciplines because the people want to see their team playing their favorite sport, and that's something that really embodies the culture here in Barcelona. But in a way, Barcelona are receiving bad messages from La Liga and from the Spanish football itself because it limits them when it comes to spending in that regard.
Yeah, the success of the men's team and building the men's team should then not inhibit another successful club like the women's team or basketball, et cetera, et cetera. Let's move on to the women's team specifically. In Barcelona, how do you compare the two in terms of profitability, but also fandom?
Yeah, so basically the women's team, as we mentioned, is one of these disciplines that is also factored in when calculating the salary limit. We have to point out that the women's team is the only sporting discipline in Barca that is profitable for the club. Basketball is not profitable, handball is not profitable, football isn't. The women's team is right now. The last data that we have is from 2024. Barcelona spent 12 million on wage bill for the women's players. And they got, in terms of revenues, 17 million. So that's a 5 million profit. That's good. That's just really good. But we're talking about the club, Barcelona, that next season expects to have a total income of 1 billion. And that's generated by the men's team mainly. Everyone in the club knows that the discipline that moves the needle for the club is the men's team. And that's why they push harder just to have a good squad in there, to assemble a good group of players to compete for trophies, because they know that is what makes the club going. And with the women's team, what happens is that Barcelona wants to keep spending sort of the same that they are spending now in an industry that is growing really rapidly. And a lot of players, really talented from Barcelona, are getting better offers from other clubs within the industry. And Barcelona, they feel that they don't want to spend that much in women's football just to have the sustainability in all their areas. So that's a bit the dilemma that they have and why so many players have left Barcelona within the last months.
Per ESPN's reporting, they said for now, starting this season, the first 2 million euros spent on a women's club will be exempt from that La Liga cap that you talk about. How much of that is a trend in the right direction now that so many of the Liga F teams are associated with the men's side?
I think that's a good thing, and in a way, La Liga has to adapt and to add in new ways to favor investment in Spanish football, and that's the thing that they try to do, just to favor that. I still think that it's probably not enough because Barcelona, in a way, they are a massive structure and they can afford to have some investment in women's football. But other clubs such as, I don't know, Real Betis, or Espanyol or Levante, who've had women's team in La Liga, they don't have the magnitude of Barcelona, and just for them, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million are massive money. So yeah, I think that in a way, Spanish football has to reformulate and has to think about that and has to find ways to make women's football a place to invest and a place to be a better product overall, and just to help clubs just to boost that competition for sure.
To put a bow on this entire conversation, and Paul, thank you so much for making something that is so complicated, really so digestible for all of us who try to understand this. We know that the club that is Barcelona, one of the most recognizable, successful teams on planet Earth, is the priority for the franchise. But how much more is the men's side a priority than the women's? If you take it on a scale of 100, how much of a percent would you say is the men's versus the women's?
I mean, I would say that possibly 90% or an 80% of the club is just about the men's football, just for the figures that I mentioned earlier about the money that they generate and everything. It's true that the influence within the club, and especially in the fan base of the women's team, is massive. And it's something that is growing. But the club knows that the sustainability is more about the men's team, and that's why they just prioritize the men's team. Let's see if that changes in the future, and if they have room just to keep investing in the women's team, just to compete with the best in Europe.
Paul, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Hope I helped.
Now, to help us make it all make sense as to what this means for the women's side, we bring in Melanie Anzidei. Hello, Melanie. Thank you so much.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we're going to kick things off. If you can just help our listeners understand why now, as the season has opened, is there just 17 active players on this Barcelona roster?
Okay, so it is obviously a very complex situation, but at the core of it is you have Barcelona Feminine, which is one of the most successful teams in Europe and one of the most successful teams arguably in the world. You have players like Aitana Bonmanti, you have such talent on that roster. But over the past several weeks, one of the narratives around the team, especially heading into this new Liga F season, has been kind of the departures that we've been seeing. You know, some big name departures, I believe it was 6-7 players have left since in that time frame. And that kind of raises a lot of alarms, a lot of red flags, trying to figure out kind of what's happening. And a big part of that is because we have this issue with the financials that kind of tie the women's and the men's teams. So, of course, while you have this very successful product on the pitch, you're also having, these tough decisions coming up from the top that are kind of resulting in seeing, some pretty big names kind of departing. And, as we head into a new season, it's kind of raising alarms of kind of what will this team look like when the season gets started.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into what the team looks like right now. The core group of players that lost in the Champions League final last year to Arsenal, 6 of those, as you mentioned, are gone. The last 2 players to depart is Swedish forward Fridolina Rolfo, who went over to Manchester United, and defender Jana Fernandez, who is now at the London City Lionesses. An interesting part of this is the fact that Rolfo had time on her contract and was seemingly allowed to walk away. It seems a little abnormal, but what can you tell us, and what does it say, Melanie, about the current climate at Barcelona?
Yeah, so of course that was when it happened, when news came, especially like you said, she still had a year on her contract. It kind of, set off even more alarms. It set off headlines. It was an alarming exit, to say the least, because Rolfo had been such a key part of Barcelona's championship winning team last year, or, just the success and the veteran ability that she brought and just the versatility as a player. So to see someone of that caliber kind of leave earlier, it just makes you wonder why. And of course, as The Athletic has reported previously, the concerns and the reasons for her departure weren't about the sporting side of it. It was about the financial side of it. And that kind of points to, again, this larger issue of like the decisions that are being made aren't being made because of what's happening on the pitch, kind of what's happening in the larger organization of Barcelona. And now the questions remain, well, how will this actually impact the sporting side as the season gets underway?
Let's talk a little bit more about that. As our first guest, Paul, alluded to, the women's side is, on paper, the only side that brings in more money than it spends. So what that tells you in a nutshell is the fact that Barcelona doesn't spend a ton of money on the women's team, and yet these players overperform. The Barcelona men's budget is something around $319 million on player salaries. The women's side, closer to $13 million. What you're saying, looking ahead, what are you seeing, Melanie, when you look ahead, given all of that?
Just concern, because you do have such great players that are outperforming, and you have a team that is outperforming. And when you're doing so well, you bring interest from other clubs, it just also contributes to raising salaries, of course. So inevitably, we have just overall in the global women's soccer space, you're seeing, record transfers, you're seeing increasing salaries. So of course, that means you should also be seeing, to that effect, increasing budgets, which we might not necessarily be seeing that at Barcelona so much. But unfortunately, that kind of raises questions about, you have some other major core players that might be coming up for renewal next year. So what is Barcelona going to do to try to keep them, especially if there is interest from other clubs, or because, their values are also increasing with how they perform on the pitch?
You mentioned some of those players. 8 players of these 17 contracts are up at the end of this Liga F season. And these are heavy hitters. These are important players. These are Spanish national team players in Alexia Putellas, in Claudia Pina, in Caracol. What has to happen for us not to be having this same... Realistically, Melanie, what do you think can happen between then and now for us to not be having the same conversation this time next year?
Well, there has to be an increase in investment on the women's side to make sure that you're able to keep these players. That's obviously...
Do you think that happens, though, between then and now?
I do know there is, I've seen reported that there is maybe $2 million of the €2 million of the euros that are going into the investment aren't going towards a salary cap, which is, a step towards progress.
Sure.
Is that enough? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm curious to see this season, and what I think might happen, is you're going to have to see Barcelona is going to have to make some tough decisions. One of the things that we have heard Barcelona say publicly is that they will be focusing more on their youth academy, and creating this talent and developing talent, which of course then it's kind of a gamble too, and also a risk, because if you're not investing in keeping some of these big names, then you are investing on young players, and then that's kind of a gamble. But the reality is now you also have to decide what kind of players you want to keep on your roster. Are you going to invest in veteran talent? Are you going to invest in players that are able to develop this next generation that Barcelona has to inevitably focus on, because they might not have the finances to keep the more expensive talent, the more rising stars that might gain interest from other clubs overseas?
Yeah, to me, when you hear invest in young players, it's great. But it says rebuilding years in so many ways. And that's not something you think of when you think of a team like Barcelona. I want to talk about a quote from Aitana Bonmati to ESPN after Barcelona's game against the Liga MX Femenil All-Stars. She said something along the lines of yes, we have a smaller squad. It's an opportunity for the young players to progress a little faster. Of course, each player progresses at their own pace, knows what their optimum is, but I think that right now it's a great opportunity for them. So Yes, very nice from the two-time Ballon d'Or winner Bonmati. But we know that while she wants to see her young friends do well, she also she wants to be winning Champions League. That is why she and the big names are at Barcelona. She went on to say, "I have no doubt that we have the same ambition as always to win titles again, especially the Champions League, which unfortunately we couldn't win last year. I think it all starts with mentality we have as a team. We have the quality." Do you buy this from Bonmati that Barcelona hasn't lost its draw, that it's just mentality, that this is a team that has the same zest and the same lure that it used to?
I mean, as the franchise player, as the face of Barcelona in a lot of different ways, I mean, Bomonti, when she speaks, you listen. So hearing her publicly say these positive things, I think is a good thing for the players. And especially going into this controversial or, very different season for Barcelona. But at the same time, Bomonti has expressed, concerns in the past about Liga F, different things about how they need to have more investment in overall in Spanish women's football, and especially at the domestic club level. So I do believe that it's important for Bomonti to be outwardly positive and outwardly encouraging players to kind of drive the necessary, to encourage the drive for a good season ahead. However, I'm very curious to see because she has been outspoken in the past. So I'm curious if this tone will change as we get further into the season and things, injuries or, the handicapped nature of everything, how Barcelona has created the situation and has hampered the potential progress of this team. I think once that all starts playing into motion, we might be hearing a very different side of Bomonti because she's not shy about saying or calling it how it is.
That's fascinating. As as she alludes to, we're not here for league titles. This is a team that has won 6 in a row. They're looking for a 4th Champions League. What is the worst case scenario for Barcelona?
So a lot of what we're seeing now is that Barcelona isn't the only team that players want to go to. We've had a lot of investment or a lot of recent announcements of, you have some record transfers and you have some people leaving their clubs to go to other clubs. And whether that be in the WSL, whether that be in even the NWSL. I mean, just recently, last week, we saw Lisbeth Jacqueline Ovalle going from Tigres to the NWSL. And that was an example where you had a lot of money being thrown at a player and a lot of people bidding on someone who has a lot of potential. And she inevitably chose, going to the NWSL. Why didn't she choose a club like Barcelona? Why didn't she look at Liga F? Did she? So now this global environment where you're having so many clubs investing outside of, the usual big names that we're seeing. We also saw Naomi Girma going to Chelsea and Olivia Smith going to, also going to the WSL. These are examples where, if Liga F isn't going to be as competitive, if it's not going to be the place where players want to go. And, that is something that Bomonti had spoken about previously, comparing specifically with the WSL, even the NWSL, saying that if the league doesn't invest, then it's going to fall behind. And, you can, if you go to the WSL, you're going to be competing good teams week in and week out. In Liga F, you have a larger league where you have more teams, but then you might not have the same, competitiveness week in and week out. So those are things that, is outside of, players' ability. That's something that needs to be addressed from the top and also from a league-wide perspective, because if they don't invest, they're going to fall behind.
All right, finally, Melanie, let's give the people something to look forward to. This is still Barcelona. Who should fans be keeping an eye on this season?
I'm very excited about Claudia Pina and what she brings to this team. I mean, last year she had a stellar season with Barcelona, a Ballon d'Or nominee. I'm very excited to see, and she's one of those players that has still so much potential and growth, and she has a potential to kind of really lead this team into its future, the next generation. So I'm very excited for her. I'm also very excited, of course, you have Aitana Pimenti, one of arguably the best player in the world. I'm always excited to see what she does because she always kind of steps it up, and when you think she's done, she's not. And I'm very excited to see what she does this season too.
Yeah, that's the spirit. That's the way I love to end a segment. Melanie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before we get out of here, be sure to subscribe to Fulltime wherever you get your podcasts, and go follow the show for all of our extra videos and interview snippets on social media at TA Fulltime. We're on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And in case you didn't know, The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to provide free best-in-class coverage of women's sports. So go check out the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. I'm Jillian Sakovits. Thank you so very much, as always, for listening to our Fulltime Focus. And remember, Fulltime does not happen without our producer, Theo Lloyd Hughes, our video producer, Leah Griffin, and our esteemed executive producer, Emily Olson.